again, Mr. Hartman. This time talking about topic 2.4, which is all about the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Okay, so first off, the kind of one thing to know geographically, or not one thing, but some of the things to know about the Sahara Desert is, of course, it is quite large. It is about the same size as China. And so that would tend to make you think it is inhospitable and very hard to travel on. And it might be very hard to travel on, but we do have a series of oasis towns, right? There are enough areas for oases to exist because they are able to pool water from the deep underground, from the underground reservoirs. And then also, naturally, there are some places that just have some water available, right? So that's kind of the only real geographic thing that we want to talk about there. The thing that really opens up Trans-Saharan trade, though, of course, is the introduction of camels to the area by Arab merchants, Southwest Asian merchants, by what's called Arab merchants, specifically Arab Muslim merchants. Right, we'll eventually introduce them there. Sorry, I apologize. Not necessarily Muslim merchants. These are quite early, 3rd century BCE, right? And so they were, used to the Arabian Desert, so the Sahara Desert was not much different, right? And the key thing, of course, about camels is that they can consume a lot of water and then don't necessarily need to drink for a very long time, which makes them very good in dry conditions, which we also see, of course, along the Silk Road, right? And then the other kind of key innovation is the usage of camel saddles, right, which really helped not just for comfort, but also allowed for people to carry more supplies on the camels, which of course led to the ability to trade more, right? I'm not going to go into the different types of saddles. That's not necessary, nor the different types of animals and how they adapt to this type of interaction, right? There would then, of course, be the camel caravans, right? Again, like we saw on the Silk Road, merchants realized it was safer to travel in large groups to protect themselves, right? And then also in case something did happen on the kind of treacherous conditions of the Sahara, that nobody would die, right? And so by the 8th century CE, we have a full-blown development of the Trans-Saharan Trade network. And the most important good to come out of the Trans-Saharan Trade network, especially at this time, was gold. So gold came from the Senegal River, the kind of southern West Africa region. Okay. And so this is the most important good, but the other two, as we've talked about several times at this point, were also ivory and slaves would go across the Trans-Saharan Trade network, right? And then in exchange, right, these two things tended to be exchanged for maybe goods not necessarily as valuable, but certainly maybe important in producing a strong economy, salt, horses, and textiles, right? Tended to be the goods these were traded for, right? And so utilizing and controlling this Trans-Saharan trade, right? Controlling the Saharan trade helped to really develop states within West Africa, West African empires, let's call them. Specifically two that they wanted to bring up, really three, I guess: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And then the other key component here is that it introduces Islam into West Africa. Okay, so let's talk about those West African states. We've already talked about Ghana, so we're actually going to focus on Mali for this section, since Ghana is not part of the 1200 to 1450 sector. And so Mali, of course, profits from the gold trade and also taxes all trade, right, coming into the state. Taxes their trade for their wealth, right? That's how they kind of make their money in that society, right? They were mostly farmers who cultivated two goods, sorghum and rice. And we're talking about a state that is in the it's south of the Sahara, right? So farming was easy and plentiful. It's a tropical or subtropical kind of biome, right? So it wasn't too hard for them to farm, right? Two major cities here, and one in particular I want to highlight, Timbuktu, and to a lesser extent, the city of Gao, become cities of Islamic centers of Islamic learning, as well as cities, right? Major cities. Timbuktu has a pretty famous university as well, right? And so they talk about how the books coming out of there were quite valuable, right? And so because of this growth in trade, right, we started to see the desire, the demand almost for stronger states. Stronger and more organized states, right? The need to kind of govern that. And so one of the things they talk about here is that Mali developed a currency. Now that currency wasn't necessarily gold, or I should say like coins, right? They talk about cowrie shells, cotton, gold, glass beads, and salt. Right. And so we also needed protection of the trade routes, right? So they would develop a pretty heavy military, very strong military that would help protect that trade. And so they would also take over resource-rich areas. Especially where gold deposits existed, right? And so because these two, right, led to them creating a military that was quite strong with iron weapons and horses that they got from that trade. Okay. They talked about Sundiata here a bit. I'm not going to do his whole origin story. He's actually probably the lesser important of the two for art purposes of the two rulers they do talk about. But there is kind of a creation tale around him, whether it's true or not. Right? He is considered the Lion Prince. Right, and so the important thing though from him is that he's considered to be a Muslim, and he used his faith to establish those trade connections that would make Mali incredibly wealthy. So he used those to establish those trade relations with North Africa. Right. And so under him, right, that gold trade thrives, and he is able to use that to develop the wealth of Mali and make it incredibly strong, right? But the more important of the rulers that we want to talk about for Mali is, of course, everybody's favorite, Mansa Musa. Okay, so Mansa Musa is very, very famous. But he's not necessarily known as like a strong ruler. Instead, he's known for his devoutness to Islam, right? His religious leadership. Probably the most famous thing he does is that he takes a pilgrimage to Mecca. And along the way, so he brings a huge caravan with him full of lots of goods and luxury goods and wealth, right? Very extravagant, right? And he distributes that wealth, distributes that gold along the way to kind of show his power and wealth of his society. Especially in the city of Cairo, he basically causes an economic depression in Cairo by inflating the value of gold there, right? And so once he returns from here, right, he establishes the religious schools in Timbuktu. Sorry, let me add religious there. He establishes religious schools in Timbuktu. Kind of, again, this is when it becomes the very famous center of Islamic scholarship that we know it today, right? He built, let's get a new point here, mosques throughout the empire, right? Especially in the trading cities. Okay. And then also sponsored overseas, abroad students. Sponsored students to travel to other Islamic areas, right, to learn more. Especially, of course, the House of Wisdom uh, in Baghdad. Okay. 100 years after his death or so, we start to see a decline. And after that, we see in the late 1400s, the Songhai kingdom will take over. They will be even more wealthy and more powerful than the Mali before them, which makes sense because they were able to take them over, right? And they follow the same kind of pattern, right? They control trade to gain wealth, right? They become very powerful there. But it is once we see the Europeans make their way into Africa and start to trade there, that the West African kingdoms as a whole are going to kind of fade away as a major power. Okay. But one of the major takeaways here is the role of Islam in West Africa is really solidified by the Mali kingdom. Okay. And then here they kind of have a chart going over empires in Western Eurasia and Africa. I'm not going to go into too much on that today, but know that that's a useful table. And that's going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in